There's a path where you keep doing exactly this. Same intensity, same hours, same general direction, for 10 more years. And you end up somewhere. Not nowhere. Somewhere specific, with a specific life in it that you never once chose. And here's the part that makes it hard to see. You're working. The list gets done. Things ship. If somebody stopped you right now and asked what you're building, you'd have an answer ready, and it'd sound fine. And about 4 seconds after they walked off, you'd notice you don't completely believe it. It isn't a lie. It's just a thing you say. So that's not a warning. That's the default. It's what happens if nothing changes. And the thing about it that should get your attention is that it requires absolutely nothing from you. You don't have to give up. You don't have to fail. You can work this hard the entire time and still arrive somewhere you'd never have picked. Because at no point in the process did anybody ask you to pick. So let's go find true north. Question 1. Do you actually get a say in this, or is this just how it turned out? Start here, because everything downstream is pointless if the answer's no. In 1967, Martin Seligman and Stephen Meyer ran the experiment that made both their careers. Dogs got shocks they couldn't escape. Later, in a box where escape was easy, most of them didn't even try. They lay down and took it. And they called it learned helplessness. It became one of the most cited results in the history of psychology. And it turned into the standard explanation for depression, for poverty, for why people stay in situations they could walk out of. You already know the concept, even if you've never heard the name. It's the thing you've quietly wondered about yourself. Now here's what happened next. In 2016, the same two men published a paper called Learned Helplessness at 50. 50 years of work on their own finding. And what they did in it was reverse half of it. The original theory said passivity is learned. 50 years of neuroscience said no, passivity isn't learned. Passivity is the default. It's the built-in mammalian response to circumstances you can't control, and it runs through serotonin activity in a brainstem region called the dorsal raphe nucleus. It's factory installed. Nobody has to teach it to you, and no experience has to earn it. What gets learned is the other thing. What gets learned is control. The ventromedial prefrontal cortex learns to detect that you have some, and when it detects it, it reaches down and shuts the passivity response off. So, sit with what that means about the last few years. The flatness, the sense that the outcome's already decided and you're just watching it arrive. That's not a conclusion you reached about your life. It's not evidence. It isn't the accumulated verdict of your failures. It's the resting state of a mammal that hasn't recently been shown that its actions change anything. And it will run indefinitely on its own, on no data whatsoever. And control isn't a mood that shows up and then lets you act. It runs the other way. Your brain has to detect control before it releases you, which means it needs a demonstration, which means the feeling arrives second. Always second. You are never going to feel in charge and then choose. The choosing is the demonstration. One honest limit, and it's a real one. Most of the neuroscience here is animal work, rats especially, extended to humans by inference. The human evidence is thinner than the animal evidence. What's solid is the mechanism in the animal model, and the fact that the original authors themselves reversed the direction of it. But you asked whether you get a say. The best studied model of not getting a say says the not getting a say is the factory setting, and the way out of it is evidence. So the move from here is simple enough. You go out and you make some of that evidence. Question 2. Does having a destination actually do anything? Or is that just something people say? It's a fair suspicion. Have a clear goal is the single most repeated piece of advice in the entire self-improvement industry. And things repeated that often are usually repeated because they're cheap to say, not because they're true. This one happens to be one of the most replicated findings in the field. Edwin Locke and Gary Latham started working on goal-setting theory in the late 1960s. By the time they wrote it up as a formal theory, it rested on roughly 400 laboratory and field studies, with more than 40,000 participants. The research base has since grown to about 1,000 published studies, and it held up across the replication crisis that flattened large parts of social psychology. A lot of famous findings did not survive that decade, and this one came through it completely intact. The core result is about a comparison. Specific, difficult goals produce higher performance than vague ones, reliably across hundreds of studies. And the instruction that consistently loses that comparison is the one that sounds the most virtuous. Do your best. That's the loser. Not no goal at all, which at least is honest about what it is. It sounds like maximum effort. It sounds like exactly what a serious person would say. And it does close to nothing, because it never defines what counts. So there's no point at which your brain can register that you've hit anything, or fallen short of anything. It's a target with no edges. You can't aim at it, and you can't miss it. Now think about how you'd describe your plan for your life if somebody made you say it out loud, right now. Aristotle got to the same place around 340 BC by pure reasoning. If there's an end we want for its own sake, then knowing what it is matters enormously. Because like archers who have a mark to aim at, we're more likely to hit on what's right. 2,300 years apart. A philosopher with no data and a research program with 40,000 participants. Same answer. The mark is the thing, and the effort was never the part that was in question. Question 3. Then, why didn't the vision board do anything? Slow down here, because this is the one that changes how you think about all of it. Because you did try this, probably more than once. You wrote the thing down, you pictured it, maybe you got detailed about it, and you felt genuinely great for about a day and a half. And then, nothing happened. And the story you told yourself afterward was that you're not disciplined enough, or you didn't want it badly enough. Here's what the research says instead. Gabrielle Oettingen and Doris Mayer published a set of studies in 2002. Students hoping for a job after graduation, people trying to lose weight, patients recovering from hip replacement surgery. They measured how vividly and positively people imagined the outcome they wanted, and then they tracked what actually happened. The more vividly people fantasized about the future they wanted, the worse they did. Fewer job offers, less weight lost, slower recovery. Not no effect, worse. And it has shown up across domains since, in different populations, with different measures. And they found the mechanism by testing for it directly. The relationship is mediated by effort. Vividly imagining the outcome lets your brain partially experience the thing as though it already happened, which feels good, which relaxes you, which drains off exactly the energy you'd have needed to go and do it. Later work found that positive fantasy even shows up as lower blood pressure, the physiological signature of settling down rather than gearing up. So, the fantasy isn't a rehearsal. It's a substitute. That's why it felt so good and did nothing. It felt good because it was doing nothing. Those weren't two separate facts about that afternoon. That was one event. You got a small dose of the reward without the work. Your system recorded it and relaxed accordingly. And you were, in a completely literal and measurable sense, less likely to get there than you'd been that morning. The limit, stated plainly. Some of this work is correlational, meaning fantasizing and failing travel together, without proving one caused the other. Though the experimental studies in the same program do point the same direction. And it does not say that having a vision is bad. That's the misreading, and it's the one everybody makes when they first hear this. So what actually works? Oettingen spent the next 20 years building the fix. And the fix is not stop imagining the future. It's the same act with one thing added. You imagine the outcome, fully, vividly, the way you already do. Then immediately, before the good feeling has time to settle, you turn and look straight at the obstacle. Not the market, not the economy, not the people who don't get it. The obstacle in you. Then you write the response in advance, in a fixed structure. If this happens, then I do that. She calls it WOOP. Wish, outcome, obstacle, plan. It runs in under 5 minutes, and there's a body of work behind each half. And when the contrast reveals the wish isn't actually attainable, the same procedure lets you drop it cleanly instead of dragging it around for another 4 years. But look at what the if-then half is really doing, because it ties straight back to the first question. An if-then plan is a control demonstration. It's you saying, this specific thing will happen, and when it does, this specific action of mine will follow. Then the thing happens, and you do the action, and your brain gets to watch, in a small, concrete, unambiguous way, its own behavior changing an outcome. That's the exact input the ventral medial prefrontal cortex is built to detect. Every completed if-then is a piece of evidence handed to the system that decides whether you're the kind of animal whose actions matter, which is why this doesn't work by making you feel motivated. It works by making you demonstrable. Question 5. Why do you have to start from the end? Because of the house. You wouldn't build a house by just starting to build and seeing what you end up with. You start with extremely detailed plans. You work backwards, you talk to experts, you test, You give it a lot of time and effort. Nobody does that with their life. If a guy told you he was framing walls to see how it turned out, you'd assume he was joking. And if he wasn't, you'd stop taking his advice about anything. And yet that same guy, and you, and nearly everyone, will run a life on the framing walls and seeing method for 4 decades and call it being realistic. Then there's a study that says the direction of planning is itself doing work, independent of the plan. Ju-Young Park, Fang-Chi Liu, and William Hedgecock published 5 studies in 2017, comparing 2 ways to plan the same goal. Forward planning starts from today and works toward the target. Backward planning starts at the target and works back to today. Same goal, same steps, opposite order. And backward planning won on everything they measured. Greater motivation, higher expectation of actually reaching the goal, less time pressure, which is counterintuitive, since you'd assume starting at the finish line would make the clock feel worse, and better actual performance on the goal itself. And the effect got stronger the more complex the goal was. Read that twice. The harder and more tangled the objective, the bigger the advantage of starting from the end, which is the exact condition your life is in, and the exact condition under which everybody defaults to forward planning. Because forward planning is what you can do without knowing where you're going. That's the actual trap. It feels like planning. It generates real tasks, real progress, a genuinely full week. It just quietly cannot tell you whether any of it is pointed anywhere. The limits here are worth naming. 5 studies, roughly 300 university students, 1 research group, mostly short horizon academic goals. It's suggestive, not the 40,000 participant mountain that goal-setting theory sits on. Take it as a well-designed nudge in a direction the older research already pointed. And then there's the version from 1548, which is better than the modern one. Ignatius of Loyola built a decision protocol for people facing a genuine fork in their life. Consider your present decision as if you were at the point of death and decide accordingly. That much you've heard in 100 degraded forms, usually on a poster. Here's the part almost nobody quotes. He doesn't ask what decision you'd wish you'd made. He asks what method you'd wish you'd use. That's a process audit in 1548. He understood something that took modern decision research a long time to formalize, which is that you can't evaluate a decision by its outcome, because outcomes are noisy and luck is real. You can only evaluate the method. So the question isn't, what do I want my life to look like? The question is, how would I want to have decided this? And am I doing that? Question 6. Why did nobody make you do this? And nobody in this chain is a villain. So let's say that first. School hands you assignments, never a destination. The whole apparatus is built to give you the next required step, and it's genuinely good at that. And the next required step is always defined by somebody else for somewhere between 13 and 20 years. Then a job hands you a role, also not a destination. A role comes with a ladder attached, and the ladder is somebody else's answer to a question you were never asked. An institution built to produce reliable, competent, employable people has no use for a 17-year-old's 20-year plan, and every use for his choice of major. Those aren't the same question. They don't even rhyme. One is about where a life goes, and one is about which department processes him next. And the second one gets asked, with real urgency and real consequences and forms to fill out. The first one just never comes up, because there is nobody in the building whose job it is to ask it. The single question that most determines the shape of your life is the only one nobody is assigned to ask you. So it doesn't get asked. And then it doesn't get asked again. And the thing about a question nobody's assigned to ask is that its absence makes no sound at all. Nothing goes wrong. No alarm, no missed deadline, no failing grade. You just move competently through a well-built system. And then one day you're 38, and you notice you've never once sat down and picked. Question 7. What if you picked the wrong one? You will, some of it anyway. Everyone does, and an honest version of this has to say so. But look at what's actually being claimed, because the fear is aimed at a claim nobody made. Locke and Latham didn't measure whether people picked good goals. Aristotle's archer isn't guaranteed a good target. Park and Hedgecock students were planning tasks, not meaningful lives. Stack it up honestly, and the supported claim is narrow. Direction is a multiplier on effort you're already spending. That's the whole finding. Not that the right vision delivers the outcome, not that clarity makes you happy, that the effort you're already putting in at the current intensity on the current schedule produces materially different results depending on whether it's pointed at something specific. You're paying the cost either way. The direction determines what you get for it, which reframes the wrong target fear into the right size. A heading is not a coordinate. You're not carving something in stone, you're picking a bearing so the wind has something to be favorable or unfavorable to. And you find out which within months, not decades, because a specific target is the only kind you can be wrong about fast. Vague plans can't fail. That's their entire appeal, and it's the reason they're so expensive. A specific one tells you it's wrong early enough to change it, and that feedback is not the cost of picking. It's the return on picking. And here's the version of that you can act on today. The first pick is not the important one. The important one is the fourth, and you don't get to the fourth without the first three being wrong in ways you couldn't have predicted from here. The people who look like they knew all along mostly did 4 rounds of this quietly. So, here's what all of it comes down to, and it's the piece that took the longest to see. Your brain learns control by detecting it, so the feeling always arrives second. That's the whole mechanism, and it explains why every version of this you've tried didn't take. You've been waiting to feel like someone in charge of his own life before doing the things a person in charge of his own life does. It runs the other way, and it always has. So, the sequence isn't get clear, feel motivated, choose the destination, and execute. It's this. Choose something specific enough to be wrong about. Look straight at what's actually in the way, which is the part everybody skips because it ruins the nice feeling, and ruining the nice feeling is the mechanism. Write down what you'll do when it shows up. Then do that once, and let your own nervous system watch you do it. Motivation shows up afterward. It's not the fuel, it's the receipt. You're not behind because you lack discipline. You've been running full effort into a target with no edges, on a default setting you were never told was a default, using a method that 4 separate bodies of research say is the weak one. That's a solvable problem, and it's a much better problem than the one you thought you had. So pick a port, the win's the same either way.